A reading from Mark 7:24 to 37. The faith of the Syrophoenician woman. Jesus left that place and went to the vicinity of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an evil spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. She begged Jesus to drive the demon out of her daughter. "First, let the children eat all they want," he told her, "for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs." "Yes, Lord," she replied, "but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "For such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found her child lying on the bed, the demon gone. The healing of a deaf and mute man. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon, down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of Decapolis. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged him to place his hands on the man. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, "Ephphatha," which means, "be opened." At this the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. "He has done everything well," they said. "He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." Believe in miracles. I have a friend who needs some medical attention, but he won't go to his doctor because, as he puts it, the receptionist looks at me ugly. I have no idea what that means exactly, and I can't imagine the facial expressions a receptionist would have to pull in order to keep me away from my doctor. But I am reminded by that story how easy it is to let little stumbling blocks keep us from big goals. I know I am guilty of that. I put off buying a new car for nearly the entire summer because I didn't want to look for my car title. When I finally did it, it took me about 5 minutes to find. There's a trick of the mind that sometimes causes us to see a boulder in our path when it is really just a pebble. What we need to see our path clearly as it stretches out in front of us is faith. Faith is never easy. Faith requires both patience and persistence, and we can never give up on faith. And I believe that is the lesson of today's gospel reading. There are 2 consecutive stories about healing in today's gospel, and these 2 stories seem to be connected, if for no other reason than that they take place outside of the borders of the promised land. In today's gospel, Jesus first travels north of Galilee to Tyre in Sidon and heals a Gentile woman who is of Greek descent. Jesus then traveled to Decapolis, which is south of Galilee. This region was known as the 10 cities and were also known to be Greek colonies. So in both stories, we witness Jesus healing people outside of the traditional Jewish boundaries of land and society. One story takes place to the north and the other is to the south of the Jewish territory. And their stories are so interesting because, as he often does, Jesus is confounding expectations of the people around him by healing people who are outside of his religious tradition. And in the woman's case, he is also healing a Canaanite, a people who were longtime enemies of the Jews. The Old Testament is full of battles with the Canaanites. She is also an immigrant since she is descended of Greek settlers. Now, there are numerous stories about Jesus working with the truly faithful who are outside of the organized Jewish religion of his day. For example, we recall the stories of great faith that Jesus found in a Roman centurion whose slave was ill, in the story of the Good Samaritan who cared for a Jewish man who had been robbed on Jericho Road, Or the story of the grateful Samaritan who was healed of his leprosy and thanked Jesus, while the other 9 Jewish men who were healed did not take the time to express gratitude to Jesus for their miracles. This particular story is similar to these other stories. Once again, a true and deep faith is found outside the Jewish religious establishment of the day. This time, true faith was found in a Gentile, in a Syro-Phoenician woman who was a Canaanite of all things. A Canaanite. How detestable to a Jewish person of the time. The message of these stories is that Jesus came to earth for everyone, Jews and Gentiles alike. By emphasizing the location of these miracles and by telling us their ethnicities, the gospel tells us that the ministry of Jesus is not just limited to Jews. However, he does require something of those for whom he performs miracles, especially in the story of the Canaanite woman. He requires faith. Let us look at this story a little more closely. First, he is in seclusion. His enemies are gathering, the Pharisees are plotting, and he wants to slow things down a little so that the story can unfold according to the prophecies of the Old Testament. He doesn't want anyone to know that he is there. But here comes this woman of Canaan, this daughter of Greek colonialists, and she wants a favor. She comes to this man who is outside of her religion, outside of her ethnicity, and asks him to cast out an impure spirit from her little daughter. Right away, that tells us that we know she recognizes Jesus as someone special. I'm sure she's not just asking any stranger who shows up in town to perform an exorcism. And Jesus gives her what seems like a very harsh reply. He says, "Let the children eat all they want first." Why should he take bread away from them and give it to dogs? Obviously, the children are the children of Israel, the Jews. And we've already learned that he is the bread of life. And of course, this makes the woman the dog. He is saying, why should I waste myself on you when I have so much to do for my own people? Now, it is startling to hear Jesus be so grumpy and so unwelcoming. Why would he say such a thing? Well, of course, the answer is to teach us a lesson 2,000 years later. The woman replies, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And this is exactly the right answer. He tells her, "For such a reply you may go, the demon has left your daughter." So what was so right about her answer? First of all, she doesn't get angry. She doesn't say, "You call yourself a holy man? I'm telling everyone you're a fake." She doesn't get up and leave in a huff. She doesn't start to cry and despair. She knows that she has the right man for what she needs for her daughter, and she doesn't give up. She takes in his words, and in all humbleness asks again. You see, Jesus has put a stumbling block in her path to test her faith, and she doesn't trip over it. Some scholars have said that this is a great example of how to pray. She remains humble, yet persistent. She wants that miracle for her daughter, and even if it means she has to endure being called a dog to get it, well, so be it. By the way, several scholars I read concerning this passage said there is something lost in translation here. The word dog that Jesus would have used is very specific, the word for dog he would have used, and it means a small house dog, and could have also been used for anything that is small and dependent on its master's kindness. I know how the people of this church treat their dogs, and I know it's not a bad thing to be a dog of someone who goes to Mount Calvary. And here is the lesson. Her behavior is the lesson that we are meant to learn. We are sometimes like children in the grocery store crying because our mothers won't get us the candy we see by the register. If we don't get what we want right away, we fall apart. We think we have the worst mommy in the world. We get angry and turn away from her and won't mind her. And sometimes, when we don't get what we want right away from God, we get angry and turn away. We get offended and think, fine, I'll do it on my own. I don't need anyone, not even God. Let me assure you, There is no such thing as doing it on your own. No one does it all on their own. No one. I've heard it said that the best prayer one can say is a prayer asking God for faith. Faith in God is perhaps the greatest compass we can ask for in navigating our lives. Many of us saw a perfect example of the power of faith yesterday during the memorial service for Mary Lee Powers, the mother of our pastor Jonathan Powers. Jonathan was, of course, very sad, and I know he will miss his mother terribly in the time to come, but the one thing I heard him say more than once was, "I'm excited for her. I'm excited for her." He knows with an absolute faith that she is in heaven, united with her loved ones, and dancing on streets of gold. So back to the lesson the story of the Canaanite woman is meant to teach us. We demonstrate our faith in our God when we go before him persistently and humbly. When we acknowledge how small and helpless we are before him, that is when our prayers become most perfect. Don't try to bargain with God. Don't get angry with God. Don't ask for miracles you may not be ready for. Don't be afraid to ask because someone has told you that you belong, like the Canaanite woman, to the wrong group of people. We are all the same before him, and there is a reason why so many of us pray on our knees. Let your prayers be humble and your faith be strong, and you may just be surprised by the miracles he has planned for you. Thank you.